Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? That strange, hollow feeling when you realize the people who should see you most clearly are looking right through you? I lived with that feeling for 18 years. My accomplishments were footnotes. My struggles were overlooked, and my future was considered an afterthought, all while my brother basked in the spotlight of my parents' undivided attention. But life has a way of balancing the scales when you least expect it, and sometimes, the person who truly sees your worth has been quietly planning your victory all along. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember the exact moment I realized I wasn't a priority in my own family. It was my 12th birthday, and I'd been dropping hints for months about the astronomy telescope I'd seen at Henderson's science shop downtown. I'd left the catalog open on the kitchen counter, circled the model in red marker, even mentioned how perfect the viewing would be from our backyard hill. When the big day came, I unwrapped my present with trembling fingers, only to find a generic art set, watercolors and colored pencils, though I'd never shown any particular interest in drawing. "Thanks, Mom and Dad," I said, forcing a smile. "We thought you'd like something creative," Mom said, already turning to answer my brother's question about what was for dinner. 2 weeks later, my brother Mark announced he'd joined the school astronomy club. By the weekend, a brand new telescope, the exact model I'd wanted, sat in our living room. Mark showed real interest in astronomy, Dad explained when he caught me staring at it. "We need to encourage his scientific curiosity." My name is Emma Reynolds. I grew up in Lakeside, Wisconsin, a town small enough that everyone knew whose kid belonged to whom, but large enough that we had 3 different coffee shops on Main Street. My father, Robert, managed the local credit union, and my mother, Diane, worked as a dental hygienist 3 days a week. We lived in a comfortable 4-bedroom house with green shutters and a wraparound porch that was the envy of the neighborhood. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family. But pictures never tell the whole story. Mark was 16, months younger than me, but you'd never know it from the way my parents treated him. From the moment he was born, a son after a daughter, he became the center of our family universe. It wasn't that my parents were cruel or intentionally neglectful. They loved me. I never doubted that. But their love for me was a quiet, assumed thing, a background hum. Their love for Mark was a symphony played at full volume. In elementary school, my straight A's were expected. "Emma's always been a good student," they'd say with a casual nod. But when Mark brought home B's and C's, there would be celebrations, ice cream trips, and congratulatory dinners. "He's really applying himself this year," they'd announce proudly to friends and relatives. The pattern was established early and never really changed. When I was accepted into the gifted program in 5th grade, my mother reminded me not to brag about it in front of Mark, who had struggled with reading. When I won the regional spelling bee in 7th grade, my father missed it for Mark's soccer. Practice. A practice, not even a game. "There will be other spelling bees," he said. There weren't. The only person who seemed to truly see me was my grandmother, Evelyn Barrett, Grandma Evie to me. My mother's mother, she lived about 20 minutes away in a small but immaculate house filled with books and the smell of cinnamon. She'd been widowed young and had never remarried, building a career as a high school librarian before retiring just as I was starting elementary school. Grandma Evie and I had a standing date every Wednesday afternoon. My mother would drop me off after school while she took Mark to his various sports practices or music lessons. Those afternoons became my sanctuary. "Let me look at you, sweet. P," she'd say each time, holding me at arm's length as if checking for changes since the previous week. "There you are, still shining bright as ever." Grandma Evie's house was the one place I never felt invisible. She listened, really listened, when I talked about books I was reading or ideas I was exploring. She asked questions that made me think deeper. She challenged me when I was being lazy with my reasoning, and she never, ever compared me to Mark. "People are like stars in different constellations," she told me once. "It makes no sense to compare them because they're designed to shine in completely different parts of the sky." On my 14th birthday, the one where my parents gave me a department store gift card while Mark received a new mountain bike the same week just because, Grandma Evie gave me a small wooden chest with brass hinges. "This is just for you," she said, her eyes twinkling with that special light they got whenever she had a secret, "for your dreams and plans." Inside was a leather-bound journal, a fountain pen with my initials engraved on it, and a curious old key. "What's the key for?" I asked. She tapped the side of her nose. "That's for later. For now, use that journal to map out your future, Emma. The world is so much bigger than Lakeside, and you're meant for bigger things than being someone's little sister or daughter. You're meant to be Emma." I carried that journal everywhere, filling it with my thoughts, plans, and increasingly, my frustrations. I wrote about the colleges I dreamed of attending: Northwestern, University of Michigan, maybe even Yale. I sketched out what my future apartment might look like. I listed potential careers: journalism, law, psychology. Writing in that journal was like having a conversation with a version of myself that existed outside my family dynamics. The Emma I could become. Throughout high school, I threw myself into academics and activities. I joined the debate team, wrote for the school newspaper, and volunteered at the public library. I studied obsessively, taking every AP class offered, staying up late to finish. Assignments. I wasn't just working for good grades, I was working for freedom. By junior year, I had a 4.0 GPA and had started researching scholarships obsessively. My parents had set up college funds for both Mark and me when we were born. The Reynolds Education Trust, they called it. They'd mentioned it occasionally throughout our childhood, usually in the context of saving for our future. But I'd never seen any statements, never knew how much was in there. Still, I took comfort in knowing it existed. Even with scholarships, college would be expensive. The trust would help bridge the gap. Meanwhile, Mark was struggling. He'd always been a C student at best, more interested in video games and his rotating roster of hobbies than actual schoolwork. By junior year, he'd discovered filmmaking and had become obsessed with YouTube channels about independent directors. "It's what I was born to do," he declared at dinner one night, waving his fork dramatically. "I just need the right equipment to start my channel." The next weekend, my parents bought him a $2,000 camera setup. I didn't complain. I'd learned early that pointing out the disparities only led to explanations about how different Mark and I were, how I was self-sufficient while he needed extra encouragement. Instead, I focused on my own path. I'd applied for a competitive summer journalism program in Chicago and was waiting to hear back. When the acceptance letter came, I was ecstatic. 6 weeks at Northwestern University, studying with professional journalists, building my portfolio, maybe even making connections that could help with college applications. The only problem was the program cost $3,200, money I didn't have, despite working part-time at the library since sophomore year. With knots in my stomach, I approached my parents one evening after dinner. "I got accepted to the Northwestern Summer Journalism Program," I said, sliding the acceptance letter across the table. Mom glanced at it. "That's nice, honey." "It's actually a really big deal," I pressed. Only 30 students were selected nationwide. Dad picked up the letter, his eyes finding the cost immediately. "That's a pretty expensive summer camp." "It's not a camp," I said, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest. "It's a pre-collegiate program. It would look amazing on my college applications." Mom and Dad exchanged looks, that silent communication that had always excluded me. "We'll think about it," Dad said finally. 3 days later, they called me into the living room for a family meeting. Mark was already sprawled across the couch, playing a game on his phone. "Emma, "We've been discussing your summer program," Mom began. "We're very proud of you for getting in, but the timing is just not great financially." Dad nodded. "College is right around the corner and we need to be smart about extra expenses right now." I swallowed hard. "I understand." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I've saved about $800 from my library job. Maybe I could apply for a scholarship for the rest? The deadlines for those have probably passed, Mom said quickly. Maybe next summer you can do something similar. I would be in college next summer, but I didn't point that out. The meeting seemed over, but Mark suddenly sat up straight, his game forgotten. "Actually, since we're talking about this stuff," he said, "I wanted to tell you guys about this film program I found." My stomach dropped as Mark pulled up a website on his phone and passed it to our parents. I could see the page from where I sat. An intensive filmmaking workshop in Los Angeles. 8 weeks, $5,500. "It's this summer," Mark continued, his voice gaining enthusiasm. "Professional equipment, real directors as mentors, and at the end, they help you launch your YouTube channel with industry connections." "That sounds incredible," Mom said, her face lighting up in a way it hadn't during my entire conversation. "It's in LA," Dad pointed out, frowning slightly. "That's a long way to send you." "They have supervised housing," Mark countered. "And this could be my big break. You know how many successful directors started by getting noticed on YouTube?" The conversation continued as if I wasn't there, with Mark outlining all the reasons this program was essential for his future, and my parents raising objections that he systematically addressed. I sat silently, watching the familiar scene unfold. Mark wanting, my parents resisting nominally, then inevitably giving in. "We'll need to look at the budget," Dad said finally. "That's a significant investment." "Think of it as exactly that, an investment," Mark argued. "In my future." I stood up abruptly. "I'm going to Grandma Evie's." No one seemed to notice as I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door. I didn't call ahead, which wasn't like me, but Grandma Evie welcomed me with open arms when I showed up on her doorstep, tears barely contained. "What's happened, Sweet Pea?" she asked, ushering me inside. The story spilled out of me in messy, angry bursts. The journalism program, my parents' refusal, and then Mark's film workshop that cost nearly twice as much. "They're going to say yes to him," I concluded, wiping angrily at my eyes. "They always do. And it's not that I don't want him to have opportunities. It's just, what about me?" Grandma Evie listened without interrupting, her face betraying nothing beyond compassionate attention. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Your parents love you both," she said finally. "I know that," I said quickly. "I'm not saying they don't. But knowing something here," she tapped her temple, "doesn't always match what you feel here." She placed her hand over her heart. "And feelings matter, Emma. Your feelings matter." She got up and put the kettle on for tea, her solution to most of life's problems. "Tell me about this journalism program," she said as she pulled 2 mugs from the cabinet. "What would you get out of it?" For the next half hour, I explained the program in detail. The workshops, the mentorship opportunities, the chance to have my work published in their annual anthology. Grandma Evie asked thoughtful questions, and with each answer, I felt my excitement returning, temporarily displacing the hurt. "It sounds perfect for you," she said, when I finally ran out of words. "Absolutely perfect." She placed her mug in the sink and turned to me with a decisive expression. "How much did you say it cost again?" $3,200, I said. "Plus the train to Chicago, I guess." Grandma Evie nodded. "I'd like to pay for it." "What? No, Grandma, that's too much." "Emma Reynolds," she interrupted firmly, I have spent my entire adult life living simply and investing wisely. I have the means and, more importantly, I have the desire. This is the kind of opportunity that shapes futures, and your future matters to me." Tears welled up again, but different ones this time. I don't know what to say. "Say yes," she smiled. "And then go tell your parents that the financial aspect is taken care of. They can focus their resources wherever they feel they're most needed." The implied criticism was subtle, but clear. Grandma Evie was too dignified to directly criticize my parents' choices, but she wasn't blind to them either. When I told my parents that evening that Grandma Evie was paying for my program, they seemed both relieved and slightly uncomfortable. "That's very generous of her," Mom said. "But we can't keep relying on your grandmother," Dad added. "We're your parents. We should be the ones handling these things." "It's fine," I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "This way, there's money for Mark's film program, too." Dad's expression confirmed what I already knew. They'd already decided to send Mark to LA. The summer programs unfolded as expected. I spent 6 transformative weeks at Northwestern, writing daily, meeting journalists, and discovering my voice. I called home weekly, but the conversations were brief and centered mostly around Mark's experiences in LA. According to my parents, he was thriving, making incredible connections, and had even been singled out by one of the program directors as having exceptional vision. When I returned home, my portfolio bulging with published pieces and letters of recommendation, my parents were distracted with preparing for Mark's return the following week. They'd planned a welcome home dinner with all his favorite foods. They'd invited extended family to see the short film he'd produced during the program. "How was your program, honey?" Mom asked as she flipped through a recipe book. "It was amazing," I said. "My article on urban food deserts was selected for their anthology. I've got a copy for you to read." "That's nice," she said, not looking up. "Do you think Mark would prefer lasagna or pot roast for Sunday?" I didn't answer, just took my bags upstairs and called Grandma Evie. "I want to come over tomorrow," I said. "I have so much to show you." "I've cleared my entire day," she replied. "I want to hear everything." Senior year arrived with mounting college application pressure. I had my sights set on Northwestern after my summer experience, with the University of Wisconsin and University State of Michigan as strong backups. Mark, surprisingly, had maintained his filmmaking interest beyond the usual 3-month limit of his hobbies. He'd set up a YouTube channel that had gained modest traction and was talking about film schools in California. "USC has the best program in the country," he announced at dinner one October evening. "Spielberg went there." "That's a very competitive school," I pointed out, "and expensive." "If you're good enough, the cost doesn't matter," Mark said dismissively. "They have scholarships." I bit my tongue. Mark's grades had improved slightly junior year, but they were nowhere near USC admission standards, and film school scholarships were notoriously competitive. As application season progressed, I threw myself into essays, recommendations, and financial aid research. I'd saved about $4,000 from my library job and summer work, but it was a drop in the bucket for college costs. I was counting on merit scholarships and the college fund my parents had established. One evening in late November, I approached my dad in his home office. "I was wondering if we could talk about the college fund," I said. "I'm filling out financial aid forms, and they ask about family contributions." Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Right, we should discuss that." He motioned for me to close the door and sit down. Something in his expression made my stomach tighten. "Emma, you know we've always tried to be fair with you and Mark," he began. I nodded, though fairness had rarely been my experience. "The college fund, well, there have been some changes, some necessary adjustments." "What kind of adjustments?" I asked, though I already knew. I could feel it coming like a storm I'd been watching form on the horizon for years. Dad sighed heavily. Mark's film school aspirations. They're significantly more expensive than we'd budgeted for. UCLA, USC, these are top-tier private institutions with price tags to match. So are Northwestern and Michigan, I pointed out. Yes, but... He paused, searching for words. Mark's talent is very specific. He needs the right environment to nurture it. You're academically gifted. You'll thrive anywhere. And with your grades, you're practically guaranteed scholarships. The familiar refrain, Mark needs more, you'll be fine on your own. How much of the college fund is left for me? I asked directly. Dad couldn't meet my eyes. We've had to reallocate most of it to Mark's film school applications and preparations. The equipment he needed for his application portfolio alone was substantial. Most of it? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. All of it, he admitted. Finally. But we're confident you'll get scholarships, and we can help with books and some expenses. You've always been so responsible with money, Emma. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the blow. Years of tacit favoritism had culminated in this moment of absolute clarity. When it came down to actual resources, actual futures, my parents had chosen Mark's over mine. I see, I said, standing up. Thank you for telling me. Emma, Dad started, but I was already walking out. I didn't cry. I didn't slam doors. I simply went to my room, pulled out my phone, and texted Grandma Evie. Can I come over tomorrow after school? Need to talk. Her reply was immediate. Always, sweet pea. I'll make your favorite cookies. That night, I lay awake thinking about all the little moments that had led to this. The telescope, the missed spelling bee, the summer program they couldn't afford until Mark needed something more expensive. I thought about the college fund that had been promised to both of us, but was now entirely his. I thought about how my parents would explain this decision to themselves, to others, maybe even to me in well-meaning justifications. I didn't hate them. I didn't even hate Mark, who had simply accepted the preferential treatment as his due for so long that he probably didn't even see it anymore. What I felt was a cold, clarifying certainty. I was on my own, and perhaps I always had been. The next day at Grandma Evie's, I explained what had happened in flat, emotionless terms. The college fund is gone, I concluded. All of it, for Mark's film school dreams. Grandma Evie's face showed a flash of anger, real anger, something I rarely saw from her, before settling into a resolute expression. And what did your mother say about this decision? She asked. I haven't talked to her yet, I admitted. Dad told me, but they must have decided together. Grandma Evie made a small sound. She was quiet for a long moment, then stood up and walked to her small home office. When she returned, she was carrying a folder. I wasn't planning to have this conversation until your graduation, she said, sitting beside me on the couch. But plans change when circumstances demand it. She opened the folder and placed several documents on the coffee table between us. I leaned forward to look at them. They were financial statements, education savings account statements, with my name clearly printed at the top. What is this? I asked, confused. Your college fund? Grandma Evie said simply. The one I started the day you were born. I stared at the papers, trying to process what I was seeing. The most recent statement showed a balance of just over $82,000. I don't understand, I said finally. Grandma Evie took my hand in hers. Emma, I've watched you grow up in your brother's shadow. I've seen you achieve and persevere with minimal recognition. I've observed how your parents, despite loving you deeply, have consistently directed their resources and attention to Mark's needs and wants. She squeezed my hand gently. I couldn't change their parenting choices, but I could make sure that when the time came for you to step into your future, you would have what you needed. Does Mom know about this? I asked, still stunned. No, Grandma Evie shook her head. Diane means well, but she's always had a blind spot when it comes to balancing her attention between you two. This money is yours, Emma, for your education, at whatever school you choose. Your parents' decisions about their finances don't have to determine your path. I looked down at the statements again, reality slowly sinking in. I had options, real options. I don't know what to say, I whispered. You don't need to say anything, she replied, but I do want you to know something else. She reached across to the side table and picked up a small silver key that had been sitting there, identical to the one she'd given me with my journal years ago. Remember this? She asked. I told you its purpose would come later. Well, it's later now. She stood and motioned for me to follow her to the spare bedroom that doubled as her home office. From the bookshelf, she removed a small fireproof safe I'd never noticed among the books. The key fit perfectly. Inside the safe was another folder, thicker than the first. Grandma Evie handed it to me. This is the rest of your future, she said, her voice thick with emotion. When you're ready. I stared at the folder in my hands, thick and heavy with something more than just paper. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside were documents, investment statements, property deeds, and a handwritten letter, sealed in an envelope with my name on it in Grandma Evie's elegant script. What is all this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Grandma Evie guided me back to the living room and sat beside me on the couch. When your grandfather passed away 20 years ago, he left me well provided for. Better than most people knew. Her eyes took on a faraway look. William was always good with money, cautious but smart. He had investments in several companies that grew substantially over the years. She pointed to the investment statements. I continued his approach, living simply while watching those investments grow. I never needed much, so the money just accumulated. She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. Some people thought I was just a small-town librarian living on a modest pension. I preferred it that way. I flipped through the statements, seeing numbers that made my eyes widen. Grandma, this is security, she finished for me. Not just for college, but for whatever comes after. For a house someday if you want one. For starting a business, if that's your path. For traveling the world, if that calls to you. She took my hand. For a life where you never have to depend on anyone else's approval or support to follow your dreams. Tears filled my eyes, not just from the shock of what these papers represented financially, but from the profound realization that someone had been seeing me, truly seeing me, all along. The letter explains everything, Grandma Evie continued. The college fund is accessible now. The rest becomes available when you turn 25, old enough to know yourself, young enough to have your whole life ahead of you. I don't know how to thank you, I said, a tear escaping despite my best efforts. You don't thank someone for believing in you, sweet pea, she said, gently wiping the tear from my cheek. You just prove them right. I drove home in a daze, the folder safely tucked in my backpack. The house was quiet when I arrived. Mom was at her book club, Dad working late, and Mark presumably out with friends. I went straight to my room and sat on my bed, carefully rereading every document Grandma Evie had given me. The reality slowly sank in. I had options, real, tangible options. Northwestern wasn't just a dream anymore. Neither was Columbia or any of the other schools I'd secretly considered but dismissed as financially unrealistic. I picked up Grandma Evie's sealed letter, but decided to save it for later. Some gifts needed to be savored slowly. The next morning at breakfast, my parents were discussing Mark's latest film project, a cinematic exploration of suburban ennui he was submitting with his USC application. The admissions counselor said it could really set him apart, Mom was saying as I entered the kitchen, especially since his grades aren't his strongest asset. I poured myself a cup of coffee, feeling strangely detached from the conversation. For the first time, their focus on Mark didn't sting. I had a secret. Strength they knew nothing about. Emma, Dad said, suddenly seeming to remember I was there. We've been thinking about your college situation. We're going to open a new credit card specifically for your books and supplies. It won't cover everything, but it's something. That's generous, I said, keeping my voice neutral, but I've actually been doing some financial planning of my own. They both looked surprised, as if the concept of me taking initiative was somehow unexpected, despite my years of self-sufficiency. I've applied for 17 scholarships, I continued, and I've saved more than you probably realize from my library job. I'll be fine. 17 scholarships? Mom repeated. When did you do all that? Over the past few months, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. While Mark was working on his film projects. There was a hint of defensiveness in Mom's expression. Well, that's very responsible of you. I also had a long talk with Grandma Evie yesterday, I added, curious to see their reaction. Mom's eyes narrowed slightly. About what? My future. College. Life in general. I kept my tone casual. She's always been interested in my plans. Dad cleared his throat. Your grandmother means well, but she doesn't always understand the complexities of raising two very different children. The choices we've made have always been about what each of you needed most. I nodded, not agreeing, but not arguing either. I should get ready for school. As I walked away, I heard Mom whisper to Dad, "Did my mother say something about our decision on the college fund?" I didn't hear his response, but it didn't matter. For the first time in my life, I felt a quiet power in keeping my own counsel. The college application season passed in a blur of essays, forms, and waiting. I applied to Northwestern as my dream school, along with 7 others including Michigan, Wisconsin, and, at Grandma Evie's encouragement, Yale and Columbia. Mark applied to 4 film schools, all private, all expensive. In December, I received my first acceptance letter from the University of Wisconsin with a substantial merit scholarship. My parents seemed genuinely pleased, if not particularly effusive. "Wisconsin's a good school," Dad said, "and with that scholarship, it would be very affordable." "It's one option," I replied. "I'm still waiting to hear from the others." Mark's first response came from UCLA in January, a deferral, not an acceptance. He stomped around the house for days, declaring the admissions committee obviously didn't understand his artistic vision. My parents spent hours reassuring him that the other schools would be different. In March, the big envelopes started arriving. I was accepted to Michigan with another scholarship offer, then Columbia with a partial scholarship. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Northwestern, not just with acceptance, but with their founder's scholarship covering 75% of tuition. I called Grandma Evie immediately. "I got in," I said when she answered, my voice trembling with excitement. "Northwestern, with the founder's scholarship." Her joyful whoop made me laugh out loud. "I never doubted you for a second," she said. "Not 1 second." "I wouldn't have applied without your encouragement," I told her, "and without knowing about the college fund." "You did this, Emma," she insisted. "The fund just gave you the freedom to reach for what you deserved all along." That evening, I shared my news at dinner. Mom and Dad offered congratulations that seemed genuine if somewhat subdued. "That's a fantastic scholarship," Dad acknowledged. "Really impressive." "Northwestern's a wonderful school," Mom added, "though it's quite far from home." "About 4 hours," I said. "Not so bad." Mark was oddly quiet, pushing food around his plate. Finally, he looked up. "UCLA rejected me. Today," he announced. "They said my grades weren't competitive enough." The entire mood of the table shifted immediately. Mom reached for his hand. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." "That's disappointing news," Dad agreed. but you've still got USC and NYU to hear from." Just like that, my achievement faded into the background as my parents rallied around Mark's disappointment. It was a familiar pattern, but this time it didn't diminish my happiness. I excused myself early and went upstairs to call Grandma Evie again, making plans to visit that weekend to celebrate properly. By early April, all the college decisions were in. I had been accepted to 7 of my 8 schools, with Yale being the only rejection. Mark had been rejected from UCLA and USC, waitlisted at NYU, and accepted at his safety school, California Institute of the Arts, still a private film school, though less prestigious than his top choices. The kitchen table became command central for comparing financial aid packages and making final decisions. For me, the choice was clear. Northwestern offered the best combination of academic excellence, scholarship support, and fit for my interests in journalism and political science. For Mark, the decision was more complicated. CalArts had offered minimal financial aid, meaning the full cost would fall to my parents. The financial reality was finally hitting home. "We could take out a second mortgage," Dad suggested one evening, spreading calculators and papers across the table. "Or I could defer for a year," Mark said, "work and save some money." Mom looked troubled. "But you'd lose momentum. You've been so focused on filmmaking lately." I sat quietly, witnessing their struggle. Part of me felt vindicated. The golden child was finally facing the limits of parental provision. But another part felt an unexpected sympathy. Mark had never had to work for anything. He'd never developed the resilience that came from fighting your own battles. "I could go to state for a year or 2 and then transfer," he suggested, naming the local university that was a fraction of the cost. Dad brightened. "That's actually very practical, Mark. You could get your general education requirements out of the way while building your portfolio." Mark nodded, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. For the first time in his life, he was settling for less than what he wanted. The week before graduation, I finally opened Grandma Evie's letter. I'd been saving it for the right moment, and somehow, that rainy Friday afternoon felt like the time had come. Her elegant handwriting filled 3 pages with warmth, wisdom, and unexpected revelations. "My dearest Emma," it began, "if you're reading this, you're standing at the threshold of your adult life, ready to step into a world that will finally see you as I always have, as an extraordinary young woman of remarkable intelligence, resilience, and character. There are some things you should know as you take this step. First, about the financial provisions I've made for you. The college fund is self-explanatory. Use it for your education without worry or constraint. Choose the school that calls to your heart and mind. The second part, the investment portfolio you'll access at 25, requires more explanation. When your grandfather died, he left me well provided for, as I've told you. What I haven't shared with anyone, not even your mother, is the full extent of those provisions. William came from humble beginnings, but had an exceptional mind for business. He invested early in several technology companies in the 1970s and 80s that grew beyond anyone's expectations. We lived simply not out of necessity but by choice, believing that wealth should provide security without ostentation. I've continued that approach, growing the investments carefully over the years. Your mother knows I'm comfortable but has no idea of the true extent of my resources. She and your father made their own way, which I respected, but I've watched from the sidelines as they've raised you and Mark, and I've seen the imbalance that perhaps they themselves cannot see. The portfolio I've set aside for you is substantial, enough to give you true independence. Use it wisely, not frivolously, but not fearfully either. It's meant to give you options, to ensure you never have to compromise your dreams for lack of resources or support. I've made similar, though smaller, provisions for Mark that he'll receive at the same age. He is my grandson too, and I love him. But you, Emma, have had to be strong in ways he never has. you've had to believe in yourself when others overlooked your light. The key I gave you years ago opens more than just the safe with these documents. It represents my belief that you will unlock extraordinary possibilities in your life. Possibilities that have nothing to do with money and everything to do with the person you've become despite, or perhaps because of, the challenges you've faced. Step forward boldly, my sweet pea. The world has been waiting for you. The letter was signed simply, "All my love, always, Grandma Evie." I sat for a long time, the pages in my lap, tears streaming down my face. Not sad tears, but the kind that come when something locked inside you finally breaks free. Graduation day arrived with all the pomp and ceremony of small-town tradition. As valedictorian, I gave a speech about looking forward while honoring the past, about finding strength in unexpected places. From the podium, I could see my parents in the audience, genuinely proud this time. Beside them sat Grandma Evie, elegant in a blue dress, beaming with the special pride of someone who had invested in me in every way that mattered. Mark was there too, his expression complicated. We'd barely spoken in the week since the college. Decisions had been finalized. There was a new distance between us, not hostility exactly, but a shifting of the old dynamics as he faced his first real disappointment while I stepped into my first real triumph. At the reception afterward, Grandma, Evie presented me with a small wrapped box. Inside was an elegant watch with an inscription on the back, "Time reveals truth. Shine on. Love, G.E." "It's beautiful," I said, fastening it around my wrist. "Something practical yet meaningful," she replied, "to remind you that your time is valuable and entirely your own." Later that afternoon, as friends and family gathered in our backyard for a graduation barbecue, Mark approached me by the oak tree where we'd once had a treehouse. "Nice speech," he said, hands in his pockets. "Thanks," I replied, uncertain where this was going. He kicked at the grass, uncharacteristically awkward. "I got my orientation schedule for state yesterday. Classes start August 24th. "That's good," I said. "It'll be a fresh start." "Yeah." He paused. "When do you leave for Northwestern?" "August 15th. Grandma Evie is driving up with me to help get settled." He nodded, then looked directly at me for what felt like the first time in years. "You know, I never really noticed before, but you've always had everything figured out, even when we were kids." I almost laughed at the irony. "I wouldn't say that. I've just had to plan more carefully because—" I trailed off, not wanting to state the obvious. "Because Mom and Dad were always focused on me," he finished, surprising me. "I'm not completely oblivious, Emma. I've always known they treated us differently." "And you were okay with that?" I couldn't help asking. He shrugged. "I guess I just took it for granted. It was easier not to question it." He looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry about the college fund thing. Dad told me they redirected it all to my film school applications and stuff. That wasn't fair." It was the first acknowledgement from anyone in my immediate family that the treatment had been unequal. I didn't know quite how to respond. "It worked out," I said finally. "I've got scholarships, savings, I'll be fine." "You always are," he said, and for once it didn't sound like an excuse to overlook me. It sounded almost like admiration. The summer passed quickly. I worked extra hours at the library to build up my spending money for college, spent time with friends before we all scattered to different schools, and had weekly dinners with Grandma, Evie. Mark got a job at the local movie theater, his first real job ever, and seemed to be adjusting to the idea of state. My parents were busy helping him prepare, buying him new bedding and dorm supplies even though he'd be living at home, and commuting to campus just 20 minutes away. The weekend before I left for Northwestern, I went to stay with Grandma Evie. We spent Saturday visiting my favorite places in town, and that evening, she made a special dinner with all my favorite foods. "I have something else for you," she said as we finished dessert. She disappeared into her study and returned with a sleek laptop. "For your journalism classes," she explained. "The latest model with all the software you'll need." "Grandma, you've done so much already," I protested. "Nonsense," she said firmly. "This is practical. You can't be a modern journalist without proper tools." I hugged her tightly, breathing in her familiar scent of vanilla and old books. "I'm going to miss you so much." "And I'll miss you," she said. "But this isn't goodbye. It's just a new chapter." She pulled back to look me in the eyes. "We'll talk every week. I want to hear every detail. Your classes, your professors, the friends you make, everything." "I promise," I said. "And I'll be home for Thanksgiving." "I'm counting on it," she smiled. "Now there's one more thing we need to discuss." She led me to the kitchen table where she'd laid out several bank statements and a new debit card with my name on it. "This is your college account," she explained. "I've arranged for a monthly transfer into this checking account for your living expenses. It's not excessive, but it's enough that you won't have to work during the school year unless you want to for experience." I stared at the card, feeling a complex mix of gratitude and something else. A sense of being valued in a tangible way that I'd rarely experienced. "Your mother might not understand all this," Grandma Evie continued. "She grew up thinking our family had modest means, and I never corrected that impression. I wanted her to make her own way, develop her own values about money and success." She sighed. "Perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps if she'd known about the family resources, she might have approached things differently with you and Mark. Or maybe not," I said gently. "I don't think it was ever really about money." Grandma Evie nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps you're right. The money is just a tool, Emma. What matters is how you use it and who you become regardless of it." Move in. Day at Northwestern dawned bright and clear. Grandma Evie and I drove up together, my car packed with carefully selected belongings. My parents had offered to come, but I gently declined, suggesting they focus on helping Mark prepare for his first day at State the following week. The campus was bustling with new students and emotional parents. Grandma Evie charmed my roommate, and her family helped me arrange my side of the room just so, and took me to a proper lunch before saying goodbye. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be," she said, as we hugged outside my residence hall. "Remember that on the hard days." "I will," I promised. "And Emma," she added, her eyes bright, "this is just the beginning." As I watched her drive away, I felt a momentary pang of something like homesickness. Not for my parents' house, but for the safe harbor of Grandma Evie's unwavering belief in me. Then I turned back toward my residence hall, toward my new beginning, feeling the weight of the watch on my wrist and the lighter weight of knowing someone had invested in me, in every sense of the word. That evening, after orientation activities and the first awkward conversations with my roommate, I sat on my bed and called home. Mom answered, sounding distracted. "Hi, honey. Are you all settled in?" "Pretty much," I said. "The room is nice, and my roommate seems great." "That's wonderful," she said, but I could hear commotion in the background. "Mark's friends are here for a send-off party before he starts classes Monday. It's a bit chaotic right now." Of course it was. "I understand," I said. "I just wanted to let you know I arrived safely." "We appreciate that. Dad says hi and good luck with your first day of classes." After we hung up, I sat quietly for a moment. Then I opened my laptop, Grandma Evie's gift, and began typing an email to her, describing everything about my first day on campus in vivid detail. As I wrote, I felt the distance from home fading in importance, replaced by the excitement of everything that lay ahead. The first semester at Northwestern unfolded like a dream. Challenging, exhilarating, occasionally overwhelming, but always engaging. I threw myself into my journalism classes, joined the campus newspaper, and found a group of friends who were as intellectually curious as I was. My roommate Layla and I became close, bonding over late-night study sessions and our shared love of political podcasts. I called Grandma Evie every Sunday without fail, and we exchanged emails throughout the week. She wanted to know everything: my favorite professors, the articles I was writing, the campus events I attended. Unlike my occasional calls home, which remained brief and somewhat superficial, these conversations were deep and satisfying. My parents seemed to be adjusting to a quieter house. Mark was struggling a bit with the academic demands of college, even at State, and much of their energy went to supporting him through this transition. I heard from friends back home that he'd already changed his major from film studies to communications, finding the technical aspects of filmmaking more challenging than he'd expected. October brought midterms and my first real test at Northwestern. I studied relentlessly, determined to prove I belonged among these high-achieving peers from across the country. When grades were posted, I'd earned A's in every class. Validation that my success wasn't just a small-town phenomenon. I called Grandma Evie immediately with the news. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice warm. "But not surprised. You've always risen to every challenge." "It feels different here," I admitted. "For the first time, I'm just being evaluated on my own merits, not as Mark's sister, not as Robert and Diane's daughter, just as Emma." "And how does that feel?" she asked. I thought for a moment. "Liberating," I said finally. "Like I can finally take up the space I'm meant to occupy." November brought an unexpected development. My investigative journalism professor selected my research project on political advertising in swing states for submission to a national undergraduate journal. If accepted, it would be published in the spring issue, a rare achievement for a freshman. When I called home with this news, my mother's response was more enthusiastic than usual. "That's wonderful, Emma," she exclaimed. "A national publication. We'll have to get copies for the grandparents." It was the most excited she'd sounded about any of my achievements in recent memory. I wondered if the physical distance had somehow cleared her vision, allowing her to see me more clearly than she had when I was right in front of her. "How are things there?" I asked. "How's Mark doing at State?" There was a slight pause. "He's adjusting. College is quite different from high school, of course. He's thinking about switching majors again, maybe to business." I could hear the concern in her voice, the familiar note of protective worry that had colored so many conversations about Mark over the years. "Business could be good for him," I offered. "It's practical." "Yes, that's what your father said." She sighed. "We just want him to find his path, you know? The way you have." It was such an ironic statement that I almost laughed. I'd found my path not with their guidance, but despite its absence. But I kept that thought to myself. "He'll figure it out," I said instead. "It just might take him a little longer." "You've always been the sensible one," Mom said, and I detected a new note in her voice, something almost like respect. Thanksgiving break brought me home for the first time since leaving for college. The familiar streets of Lakeside seemed somehow smaller, the high school I'd graduated from just months ago already feeling like part of a distant past. Mom had prepared a traditional Thanksgiving dinner, and Grandma Evie joined us, bringing her famous apple pie. Mark was subdued, his usual confidence dimmed by his first encounters with academic challenges he couldn't charm his way through. "How's Northwestern?" he asked as we set the table together, a rare moment of just the two of us. "It's amazing," I said truthfully. "Challenging, but exactly where I want to be." He nodded, arranging forks with unusual precision. "That journal thing Mom mentioned, that's a big deal, right?" "Pretty big for a freshman," I acknowledged. "We'll see if it gets accepted." "It will," he said with unexpected certainty. "You always make things happen." He hesitated, then added, "I'm starting to think I should have paid more attention to how you do that." It was the closest thing to admiration I'd ever heard from my brother. I wasn't quite sure how to respond. You'll find your thing, I said finally. It might not be what you expected, but you'll find it. At dinner, the conversation flowed more easily than I'd anticipated. My parents asked detailed questions about my classes and activities, showing more interest than they had during my entire high school career. Mark shared some self-deprecating stories about his struggles with college writing assignments. Grandma Evie watched it all with knowing eyes, occasionally catching my glance with a small, private smile. After dinner, while Mom and Mark cleared the table, Dad pulled me aside. "Your grandmother tells me you're thriving at Northwestern," he said, his voice low. "Not just academically, but in every way." I nodded. "I am. It feels right for me." He cleared his throat. "I've been thinking a lot about our decision regarding the college fund." He looked uncomfortable. At the time, it seemed like the right choice. Mark needed, well, he's always needed more support. "I understand, Dad," I said, surprised by the direction of the conversation. "No, I don't think you do," he said, meeting my eyes directly. "We made a mistake, Emma. We've been making the same mistake for years, assuming you would be fine because you always have been, taking your strength for granted." It was the most self-aware thing I'd ever heard my father say. I felt a tightness in my throat. "Mark told me about your conversation before you left," he continued, "about how you've always had to work harder for the same recognition. It made me look back at a lot of decisions differently." I didn't know what to say. This acknowledgement, coming months after it would have made a practical difference in my college choices, was still somehow deeply meaningful. "I can't change the past," Dad said. "But moving forward, I want to do better. We want to be more present in your life, more supportive of your goals." He hesitated. "If you'll let us." "I'd like that," I said softly. Later that evening, after my parents had gone to bed, I sat with Grandma Evie on the porch swing, wrapped in blankets against the November chill. "Dad apologized," I told her, "about the college fund, about everything, really." She nodded, unsurprised. "Your father is a good man who sometimes misplaces his priorities. Recognition is the first step toward change." "Did you say something to them?" I asked, suddenly suspicious. Grandma Evie's eyes twinkled in the porch light. "I may have shared some observations over coffee last week. Not about the financial arrangements I've made for you. Those remain between us, but about the pattern I've observed over the years." "And they listen to you?" "Sometimes people need distance to gain perspective," she said. "You going to Northwestern, succeeding so visibly on your own terms, it's forced them to see you differently." I leaned my head against her shoulder, just as I had countless times throughout my childhood. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." "Don't thank me yet," she replied, patting my hand. "Your journey is just beginning, Emma. The real question isn't what I've done for you, but what you'll do with all that lies ahead." As the porch swing rocked gently in the quiet night, I thought about that question, about the path that had opened before me, partially through Grandma Evie's generosity, but equally through my own determination. For the first time, I could see, beyond the constraints of being the overlooked child, beyond the need for validation that had driven me for so long. Whatever came next would be on my own terms, and that, perhaps, was Grandma Evie's greatest gift of all. The winter wind whipped across Northwestern's campus as I hurried from the journalism building to my dorm, clutching my coat tighter around me. Chicago winters were fiercer than Wisconsin's. More wind, more bite. But I found myself enjoying the sharp clarity of the cold air, the way it made everything feel more immediate and real. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Grandma Evie. "Just checking in," she said when I answered. "How was your investigative journalism presentation?" "Professor Winters said it was the most thorough analysis in the class," I replied, unable to keep the pride from my voice. "He's recommending me for a summer internship at the Chicago Tribune." Of course he is, Grandma Evie said, and I could hear her smile through the phone. You've found your element, Emma. She was right. 4 months into my freshman year, I'd discovered something unexpected. Not just that I was capable, which I'd always known, but that I was thriving in ways I couldn't have imagined back in Lakeside. Here, my drive wasn't seen as intimidating or off-putting. It was respected, even admired. How are things at home? I asked, ducking into the warmth of my residence hall. There was a slight pause. Actually, that's partly why I'm calling. Your brother dropped out of state last week. I stopped in the middle of the lobby. What? Why? He's saying college isn't the right path for him right now. He's moved back home and is talking about starting a YouTube channel again. Grandma Evie's tone was carefully neutral. Your parents are adjusting to the idea. I could imagine the scene all too clearly. Mom's hovering concern, Dad's barely concealed disappointment, Mark bouncing between defensiveness and grandiose plans. Are they upset? I asked, heading up the stairs to my floor. More worried than upset, Grandma Evie replied, especially since… She hesitated. Since what? Since they spent so much on those film school applications and preparations. Money that could have been in your college fund. The irony wasn't lost on me. The fund they'd emptied for Mark's future was now essentially wasted, while I was succeeding at a school they doubted I could afford. Is he getting a job at least? I asked, unlocking my door. He's talking about being a content creator. Full-time, Grandma Evie said. Your father is insisting on a part-time job as a condition of living at home, but you know how these negotiations go. I did know. Mark would resist, Mom would mediate, Dad would compromise, and eventually, Mark would get most of what he wanted with minimal accountability. Will this affect your winter break plans? Grandma Evie asked. I don't think so, I said, dropping my backpack on my bed. I'll still come home for Christmas. It's only 2 weeks. Good, she said firmly. I'm looking forward to it. I want to hear all about your first semester in person. After we hung up, I sat on my bed, processing this news about Mark. I'd expected him to struggle academically. He'd never developed solid study habits. But dropping out after just 1 semester was surprising even for him. My roommate Layla came in, bringing a blast of cold air with her. You will not believe what Professor Harris just announced, she said, unwinding her scarf. I pushed thoughts of Mark aside and focused on my life here, the life I was building on my own terms. Final exams came and went. I finished my first semester with a 4.0 GPA and an invitation to join the university's honors program. As I packed for winter break, I felt a curious mix of emotions. Pride in what I'd accomplished, excitement to see Grandma Evie, and a vague apprehension about returning to the family dynamics I'd managed to escape for the past few months. My father picked me up from the train station when I arrived home, greeting me with an awkward but genuine hug. You look different, he observed as we drove through the familiar streets of Lakeside. Different how? I asked. He considered this, as he stopped at a red light. More confident, maybe. More present. It was an oddly perceptive comment from a man who had spent most of my life looking past me. Northwestern's been good for me, I said simply. I can see that. He glanced at me. Your mother's anxious to have you home. It's been challenging with Mark's situation. I heard he dropped out. Dad sighed heavily. He says traditional education is stifling his creative process. Meanwhile, he's spent the last month in the basement setting up what he calls a content studio with equipment he expects us to finance. The note of frustration in my father's voice was new. Historically, he'd been the more indulgent parent, easily swayed by Mark's enthusiasms. What does Mom think? I asked. She's torn, worried about his future, but still convinced he just needs to find his true passion. Dad's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. I'm starting to think we did him no favors over the years. It was such a startling admission that I didn't know how to respond. We drove the rest of the way in silence. Home was both exactly as I'd left it and subtly different. My room remained untouched, like a museum exhibit of my high school self. The kitchen smelled of Mom's Christmas baking. But there was a new tension in the air, a sense of strain that hadn't been there before. Mark was in the basement when I arrived and didn't come up until dinner. When he finally appeared, I was struck by how unchanged he looked. Same casual confidence, same easy smile, though perhaps his eyes were a bit more guarded. "The college girl returns," he said, dropping into his usual chair at the table. "How's the ivory tower treating you?" "It's hardly an ivory tower," I replied, helping Mom bring dishes to the table. "But it's good, really good." "Emma's been invited to join the honors program," Mom said, with a pride in her voice I wasn't accustomed to hearing. "And she might get a summer internship at the Chicago Tribune." Mark raised his eyebrows. Impressive, always the overachiever. There was an edge to his words, not quite resentment, but something adjacent to it. For the first time, I wondered if the dynamic between us had shifted enough that he now felt the need to measure himself against me, rather than the other way around. "How's your YouTube channel coming along?" I asked, genuinely curious. "It's a work in progress," he said vaguely. "I'm focusing on film analysis and critique, using what I learned in my film studies classes." "Mark's waiting on some equipment we ordered," Mom explained, serving the casserole. "Once that arrives, he'll be able to produce higher quality videos." Dad gave her a look, but said nothing. The conversation shifted to safer topics: local news, plans for Christmas, an update on my cousin's new baby. After dinner, I helped Mom with the dishes, while Dad and Mark watched a basketball game in the living room. "I'm so glad you're home," Mom said, handing me a plate to dry. "It feels more balanced with you here." I wondered what she meant by balanced, but didn't ask. "It's good to be back," I said instead. "I've missed you all. And we've missed you." She hesitated, then added, "Especially given everything with Mark. I worry we're not handling it right." It was the most direct acknowledgement she'd ever made that their parenting approach might be flawed. "What does your heart tell you?" I asked carefully. She sighed, staring out the kitchen window at the darkened backyard. "That we've always made it too easy for him. That maybe we should have pushed him more, the way you pushed yourself." She looked at me then, really looked at me. "I've been thinking a lot about how different you and Mark are. How you've always been so self-sufficient, so driven, without us having to. Well, without much input from us." I kept drying dishes, unsure how to respond to this sudden insight. "I used to think that meant you needed less from us," she continued. "Now I'm wondering if you just learned early on not to ask." The truth of her words hit me with unexpected force. I had learned not to ask, not for attention, not for help, not for recognition. I'd simply found ways to provide those things for myself. "Maybe," I said quietly, "but it worked out okay." Mom took the towel from my hands and pulled me into a hug, a real one, not the perfunctory embraces we'd exchanged in recent years. "It worked out because you're extraordinary, Emma, not because our approach was right." I hugged her back, feeling a knot of something old and painful begin to loosen in my chest. The next morning, I drove to Grandma Evie's house, eager to see her and escape the subtle tensions at home. She was waiting for me with fresh cinnamon rolls and coffee. "There's my college girl," she said, enveloping me in a hug that smelled of vanilla and home. We settled in her sunroom, warm despite the December chill outside, and I told her everything about Northwestern, my classes, my professors, the friends I'd made, the opportunities I'd discovered. She listened with rapt attention, asking questions, that showed she'd been following my journey even from a distance. "You've found your place," she said when I finally ran out of words. "I can see it in how you talk about it, how you carry yourself." "I feel like I can breathe there," I admitted. "Like I'm seen for who I actually am, not who someone expects me to be." Grandma Evie nodded. "That's the gift of finding your own path. You shed the weight of others' expectations." "Mom said something surprising last night," I told her, recounting the conversation over dishes. It's like she's finally seeing the dynamic clearly. "Your mother isn't unobservant," Grandma Evie said, "just sometimes slow to connect the dots. Mark's dropping out has forced some reconsideration." "Dad, too," I added. "He actually suggested they might have made mistakes with Mark." "Growth comes at different speeds for different people," Grandma Evie remarked. "Your parents are finally catching up to what I've known all along, that you deserved more credit than you got, and Mark could have used more boundaries." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a cardinal land on the bird feeder outside the window. "Have you opened the second envelope yet?" Grandma Evie asked suddenly. I looked at her in surprise. "What second envelope?" "In the folder I gave you, there were 2 sealed envelopes. You opened the letter about the financial arrangements, but there was a second one marked for later." I shook my head. I didn't notice it. "Well, perhaps it's not time yet," she said cryptically. "You'll find it when you need it." When I returned to my parents' house that afternoon, I found Mark alone in the kitchen, making a sandwich. "Hey," he said as I came in. "Mom and Dad went grocery shopping." "Okay." I moved to the refrigerator looking for something to drink. An awkward silence fell between us. We'd never been close, but we'd never been overtly antagonistic either. Now there was a strange new distance, the gap between my forward momentum and his stalled plans. "So Northwestern is really all that?" he asked finally. I nodded. "It's challenging in all the right ways. The journalism program is incredible. Must be nice to have it all figured out," he said. But there was more wistfulness than bitterness in his tone. "I don't have it all figured out," I replied honestly. "I just found something that feels right." Mark took a bite of his sandwich, chewing thoughtfully. "I thought film was going to be that for me, but the actual classes were nothing like I expected. All these technical requirements and theory courses. I just want to create, you know?" For the first time, I felt a glimmer of real sympathy for my brother. He'd always been the golden child, praised for minimal effort, rescued from consequences. But that hadn't prepared him for a world that demanded substance over charm. "Maybe you need to find your own path," I suggested. "Not film school, not traditional college, but something that actually fits who you are." He looked at me with surprise. "That's what I've been trying to tell Mom and Dad. They think I'm just being lazy." "Are you?" I challenged gently. He had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Not entirely. I do want to create content. I just don't know if I have what it takes to make it work." "You won't know unless you really try," I said. "Not just talking about it or buying equipment, but actually putting in the work. Consistently. Even when it's hard." Mark was quiet for a moment. "That's what you've always done, isn't it? Put in the work, even when no one was noticing." It was the most insightful thing he'd ever said to me. "I guess so." "I watched your Northwestern acceptance video," he admitted. "The one where you opened the envelope on your bed and then just sat there for a full minute looking stunned. Mom had it on her phone." I hadn't known such a video existed. "She recorded that?" Mark nodded. "She was outside your door. She didn't show you because she started crying halfway through." The revelation caught me off guard. I'd assumed my college acceptance had been noted with the same polite acknowledgement as most of my achievements. The idea that my mother had secretly recorded it, that she'd been moved to tears, shifted something in my understanding of our family dynamic. "I never knew that," I said quietly. There's a lot of stuff you probably don't know, Mark replied. Like how Dad bragged to his whole office when you got that scholarship, or how Mom has a file of all your newspaper articles from high school. I stared at him. Why are you telling me this now? He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. Because watching you go off to Northwestern and kill it while I crashed and burned at State. It made me think about a lot of things differently. About how they always made everything so easy for me, and how that might have actually set me up to fail. It was a level of self-awareness I'd never expected from my brother. That's pretty insightful, Mark. Don't sound so surprised, he said with a ghost of his old smile. I'm not completely oblivious, just spoiled. We both, laughed, and something in the air between us eased. For what it's worth, I said, I think you could make the YouTube channel work if you really committed to it. You've always been good at connecting with people. Thanks, he said. That actually means a lot, coming from you. When my parents returned from shopping, they found Mark and me sitting at the kitchen table, looking at his channel ideas on his laptop. The surprise on their faces would have been comical if it wasn't also a little sad, a reminder of how disconnected we'd been as siblings for most of our lives. That evening, I went through my bags from college and found the folder Grandma Evie had given me months earlier. Sure enough, tucked behind the financial statements was a second envelope I'd somehow missed, marked simply "for later" in her elegant handwriting. I traced my finger over the words, curious but also strangely content to wait. Grandma Evie had said I'd find it when I needed it, and I trusted her timing as I trusted little else in life. Christmas came and went, a more harmonious affair than I'd expected. My parents gave me a new winter coat. Chicago winters are brutal, Dad said, and a set of professional-quality noise-canceling headphones for studying. Thoughtful gifts that showed they'd been paying attention to my new life. Mark gave me a surprisingly tasteful leather journal. To replace the one Grandma Evie gave you years ago, he said. I noticed it's getting full. I'd never realized he'd even known about that journal, let alone noticed its condition. For New Year's Eve, Grandma Evie hosted a small dinner party. Just the 5 of us, Grandma Evie, my parents, Mark, and me. The conversation flowed more easily than it had in years, and when midnight approached, she brought out champagne for a toast. To fresh starts, she said, raising her glass, and to seeing clearly what's been in front of us all along. The winter break ended too quickly. Before I knew it, I was packing to return to Northwestern for my second semester. As I was gathering my things, Mom appeared in my doorway. I have something for you, she said, holding out a small box. A going-away present. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny book. For my journalist, she explained. So you remember that we're proud of you, even when we don't say it enough. I fastened it around my wrist, unexpectedly moved. Thank you. There's something else, she said, sitting on the edge of my bed. Your father and I have been talking. We'd like to contribute to your education expenses. It won't be much at first. We're still recovering from... She trailed off, not needing to specify from what. But we want to help. You don't have to do that, I said quickly. I'm managing fine with scholarships and... I caught myself, before mentioning Grandma Evie's fund. We want to, Mom insisted. It's important to us, to me. I recognized the gesture for what it was, not just financial support, but an acknowledgement of past imbalances, an attempt to right old wrongs. Okay, I said. Thank you. She smiled, relieved. Good. We'll transfer some money to your account. Each month. Just for books and expenses. After she left, I sat on my bed, running my finger over the book charm on my new bracelet. It wasn't the acknowledgement I'd once desperately craved. That girl was gone, replaced by a young woman who'd learned to validate herself. But it was something, a bridge being built from their side for once. The day before I left, Mark drove me to visit Grandma Evie one last time. It was his idea, which surprised me. "I'll wait in the car," he said when we arrived. "You two probably have stuff to talk about." Grandma Evie was ready with cookies and last-minute advice. We sat in her sunroom again, watching snow fall gently in her backyard. "Your mother called me yesterday," she said. "She wanted my opinion on their plan to help with your expenses." "What did you tell her?" "That it was a step in the right direction," Grandma Evie replied. "A small one perhaps, but meaningful nonetheless." I nodded. "It feels strange, getting recognition now, when I've already learned to live without it." "That's often how growth works," she said. "We adapt to what's missing, develop strength around the absence, and then sometimes, when we least expect it, the gap is filled." She patted my hand. "The important thing is that you didn't wait for their recognition to become who you are." "Because of you," I said. "Your belief in me made all the difference." Grandma Evie shook her head. "I just saw what was always there. The strength was yours all along, Emma." When I returned to Northwestern, winter had transformed the campus into a monochrome landscape of white snow and gray stone buildings. But inside my residence hall, inside my classes, inside my growing circle of friends, there was warmth and color and possibility. My investigative journalism article was accepted for publication in the undergraduate journal, the only freshman submission selected that year. Professor Winters confirmed my summer internship at the Tribune, and the honors program opened doors to specialized seminars and research opportunities I hadn't even known existed. I called home weekly now, brief but more meaningful conversations than we'd had during most of my high school years. Mark had gotten a part-time job at a local production company that filmed commercials and corporate videos. A foot in the door to the industry he was interested in, with practical skills he could apply to his YouTube aspirations. "It's actually teaching me more than film school would have," he admitted during one of our occasional texts. "Turns out I'm good at the technical stuff I thought I'd hate." My parents had followed through on their promise to contribute to my expenses. Modest monthly transfers that covered my phone bill and some books. It wasn't about the money, which I didn't strictly need thanks to Grandma Evie. It was about the commitment, the tangible acknowledgement that my education mattered too. Grandma Evie and I spoke every Sunday without fail. Her questions were always specific and insightful, her advice practical but never prescriptive. She'd become even more than a grandmother to me. She was a mentor, a confidant, a champion. "Have you opened that second envelope yet?" she asked one Sunday in late February. "Not yet," I admitted. "I haven't felt like it was time." "Trust your instincts," she said. "You'll know when you need it." As winter reluctantly gave way to spring, I found myself thinking often about that unopened envelope. What wisdom had Grandma Evie saved for later? What moment was she anticipating? When she wrote whatever was inside? I kept it in my desk drawer, a reminder that some gifts are best opened when the time is right, when we're ready to receive not just the gift itself, but the truth it contains. The semester flew by in a blur of classes, writing assignments, and new experiences. I joined a political journalism club that took us to Springfield to cover the state legislature for a weekend. I made friends who challenged and inspired me. I began to envision a future in investigative reporting that excited me more than any career path I'd previously considered. In late April, as finals loomed, I received an unexpected email from Northwestern's financial aid office. An anonymous donor had established a scholarship specifically for women in journalism from small Midwestern towns, and I was the inaugural recipient. It would cover half of my remaining tuition costs for the next 3 years. I stared at the email in disbelief, then immediately called Grandma Evie. "Did you do this?" I asked when she answered. "Do what?" she replied, but there was a smile in her voice. "The anonymous scholarship for women in journalism from small Midwestern towns. That's oddly specific." She chuckled. "Emma, if I wanted to give you more money for college, I'd simply add it to your fund. There's no need for elaborate scholarships. Then who? Perhaps the universe is simply aligning to support the path you've chosen, she suggested. Or perhaps someone else has noticed what I've always known, that you're exceptional and worth investing in. I wasn't entirely convinced of her innocence in the matter, but I let it go. Whether the scholarship came from Grandma Evie or truly from an anonymous donor, the result was the same. Another door opening, another confirmation that I was on the right path. That night, as I sat at my desk reviewing my notes for finals, my gaze fell on the drawer where I kept the second envelope. Something tugged at me, an intuition that perhaps now was the time. I opened the drawer and took out the envelope, turning it over in my hands. Whatever message Grandma Evie had saved for later, whatever wisdom she'd held back until I was ready, I suddenly felt prepared to receive it. With careful fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The letter was written in Grandma Evie's familiar, elegant handwriting, dated just 3 months before she'd given me the folder with my college fund information. "My dearest Emma," it began, "if you're reading this, you've found your footing in the world beyond Lakeside. I always knew you would. Some souls are simply meant for bigger horizons, and yours has always been one of them." I settled back in, my desk chair, drawn into her words. "There's something I haven't told you, something I've been saving until you were standing firmly on your own path, secure in the knowledge that you've succeeded through your own merits, not because of any advantage given to you." My heart quickened. What more could there be beyond the generous financial provisions she'd already made? "When I was 22, the letter continued, just a year older than you are now, I was offered a position at the Chicago Tribune as a junior reporter. This was 1958, when women rarely held such roles, especially women from small towns with nothing but a state college education. My editor, Franklin Pierce, took a chance on me when others wouldn't. I spent 5 years there before returning to Lakeside when I married your grandfather." I sat up straighter. Grandma Evie had never mentioned working as a journalist. She'd always talked about her librarian career, but nothing about the Tribune. Those years shaped me in ways that echoed throughout my life. The skills I developed, asking the right questions, looking beyond surface explanations, following trails of evidence to uncover truth, served me well in every role I later inhabited, from wife to mother to librarian to investor. Franklin became a lifelong mentor, and later, when he moved into publishing, a valuable business connection. When he launched his own magazine in the 1970s, he invited me to invest. That investment, which seemed modest at the time, grew exponentially as the magazine expanded into a publishing empire. What I'm telling you, Emma, is that the financial resources I've shared with you didn't simply come from your grandfather's business acumen, though he certainly contributed his share. They came in large part from my own professional judgment, my own carefully cultivated connections, my own willingness to recognize opportunity when it presented itself. I paused, absorbing this revelation. Grandma Evie, proper, traditional Grandma Evie, had been a pioneering female journalist in the 1950s, and later, a savvy investor who had built substantial wealth through her own business decisions. It reframed everything I thought I knew about her. I never spoke much about this aspect of my life, partly because your grandfather preferred that I maintain a more conventional public image as his wife, and partly because, in our generation, women didn't call attention to their professional or financial achievements. But as I've watched you grow into the remarkable young woman you've become, I've often thought about how much of myself I see in you. The curiosity, the determination, the unflinching commitment to seeing things as they truly are rather than as others wish them to be. The financial provisions I've made for you are not charity, Emma. They are an investment in the continuation of a legacy that began long before you were born. A legacy of women who refuse to be limited by others' expectations. There's one more thing you should know. The summer internship program at the Chicago Tribune that you may one day apply for? It bears my name, though few connect Evelyn Barrett, the benefactor, with Evelyn Barrett, the former library assistant from Lakeside. I established it 30 years ago to create opportunities for young women like the one I once was, and like the one you are becoming. My hand flew to my mouth. Professor Winters had recommended me for the Evelyn Barrett internship at the Tribune. I'd assumed it was named for some distinguished journalist I'd never heard of. The idea that it was Grandma Evie's program all along felt both surreal and somehow perfectly fitting. I tell you this not to influence your path. Your journalism career, if that's what you choose, should be entirely your own. I tell you because I want you to understand that the seemingly quiet women in your life may have depths and dimensions others have never suspected. That conventional exteriors sometimes conceal unconventional minds. That the capacity to surprise others can be a kind of power in itself. Whatever you choose to do with your life, Emma, remember this: the most important inheritance I can give you isn't money. It's the knowledge that limitations imposed from the outside have no power unless we accept them as our own. All my love, now and always, Grandma Evie. I sat motionless, the letter in my hands, tears blurring my vision. All this time, I'd seen Grandma Evie as my champion, my supporter, the one person who truly saw me. But I'd never fully understood what she was seeing. Not just potential or intelligence or determination, but a reflection of herself, a continuation of a legacy I hadn't known existed. The Evelyn Barrett who'd encouraged my writing, who'd suggested journalism courses, who'd guided me toward Northwestern. She wasn't just being a supportive grandmother. She was recognizing in me the same fire that had driven her own remarkable life. I reached for my phone and dialed her number, not caring that it was nearly midnight. "Emma?" She answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the hour. "Is everything all right?" I opened the second envelope, I said, my voice thick with emotion. "The Tribune internship. It's yours. You were a journalist. You never told me." There was a moment of quiet on the line. "Ah," she said finally. "You found it when you needed it, just as I thought you would. Why didn't you tell me sooner? All those times we talked about my interest in journalism, my writing. Would it have changed your path if you'd known?" She asked gently. I considered this. Maybe. I might have felt pressure to follow in your footsteps. "Exactly," she replied. "I wanted you to find journalism if it was truly your calling, not because it was mine. And I wanted you to know that your achievements at Northwestern are entirely your own, not the result of my connections or influence. But the internship is awarded strictly on merit," she interrupted firmly. "Professor Winters has no idea of our connection. The Tribune's selection committee doesn't know you're my granddaughter. If you're chosen, it will be because you've earned it, just as you've earned everything else." I wiped away tears, feeling a curious mix of humility and pride. "You should have been famous," I said. "A groundbreaking female journalist in the 1950s. That's historic." Grandma Evie laughed softly. "Fame was never my objective, sweet pea. Impact was. And I've had plenty of that, in ways both seen and unseen." We talked for another hour, with me asking questions about her journalism days, her investment decisions, the parts of her life that had remained hidden behind the role of small-town librarian and doting grandmother. With each revelation, my admiration for her grew, along with my understanding of the subtle ways she'd shaped not just my opportunities, but my very perception of what was possible. "The money is lovely," I told her before we hung up. "But this, knowing who you really are, who you've always been, this is the real gift. Remember that when you're 75 and have a granddaughter of your own," she replied. "Sometimes the stories we don't tell shape a life as much as the ones we do." After we said goodnight, I sat at my desk for a long time, rereading her letter, absorbing its implications. The woman who'd always seen me so clearly had been seen so incompletely by everyone else, perhaps by her own design, but still. It made me wonder how many other women in my life contained hidden dimensions, untold stories, quiet revolutions that never made it into family narratives. Spring turned to summer, and I was indeed selected for the Evelyn Barrett internship at the Chicago Tribune. True to Grandma Evie's word, the selection process had been rigorous and anonymous. When I arrived for orientation, I half expected someone to mention my connection to the program's benefactor, but no one did. The program director spoke about Evelyn Barrett as a pioneering journalist who had established the internship to create opportunities for promising young women, but there was no indication that anyone connected that historical figure to my grandmother. I found an affordable sublet in Chicago for the summer, using a small portion of my college fund to cover the costs. The internship was demanding but exhilarating. Real assignments, real deadlines, real journalists who took my work seriously and pushed me to improve with each article. Mark surprised everyone by thriving in his job at the production company. What had started as part-time work filming local commercials evolved into a full-time position as a technical assistant. He discovered he had a knack for the behind-the-scenes aspects of production, lighting, sound, editing, that transformed his understanding of filmmaking. "It's not as glamorous as directing," he told me during one of our occasional phone calls, "but it's steady work, and I'm learning things I never would have in film school." There was a new maturity in his voice, a grounded quality that came from earning his place rather than having it handed to him. He'd moved into his own apartment, was paying his own bills, and had even started taking night classes at the local community college, not in film studies but in business and technical, subjects related to his work. My parents adjusted to these changes with varying degrees of grace. Mom struggled with Mark's sudden independence after years of having him firmly under her wing. Dad seemed relieved, even proud of Mark's growing self-sufficiency. Both of them made consistent efforts to stay connected to my life at Northwestern and my summer in Chicago. They asked specific questions about my classes, my internship, my plans. They continued the modest monthly contributions to my expenses. Small steps, perhaps, but meaningful ones. Sophomore year brought new challenges and opportunities. I declared a double major in journalism and political science. I moved into an apartment off campus with Layla and 2 other friends. I joined the university's investigative journalism team, working on long-form stories about local government corruption that won regional awards. The rhythm of my life took on a satisfying cadence: academic intensity during the school year, professional growth during summers at the Tribune, visits home for holidays that became increasingly comfortable as old dynamics continued to shift and evolve. Through it all, Grandma Evie remained my constant, the voice on Sunday phone calls, the wisdom in occasional letters, the steady presence who had seen my potential long before anyone else and had quietly created conditions for it to flourish. Junior year, I studied abroad in London for a semester, working as an intern at The Guardian while taking classes at King's College. The experience expanded my horizons beyond anything I'd imagined growing up in Lakeside. I traveled to Paris, Rome, Barcelona on weekend trips, collecting experiences and perspectives that enriched my writing and deepened my understanding of global issues. When I returned for spring semester, there was a letter waiting from Grandma Evie, not an email, which she'd reluctantly learned to use, but a proper letter on her cream-colored stationery. "I have news," she wrote. Not concerning news, but news that calls for some planning. She explained that her doctor had found some irregularities during her annual checkup. Nothing definitive, nothing dire, but enough to warrant further testing and monitoring. "I'm telling you this not to worry you," she continued, "but because you deserve transparency. I've always seen you as an equal, Emma, even when you were a child. That means sharing truths, even uncomfortable ones." I called her immediately after reading the letter, and she assured me that she felt fine, that the doctors were being cautious rather than alarmed. that there was no need to interrupt my studies or change any plans. "But I'd like you to come. Stay with me for part of the summer," she added. "The Tribune has agreed to let you work remotely for a portion of your internship. I've already arranged it." The casual mention of her influence at the Tribune, something she would never have, revealed before I knew her history there, made me smile despite my concern. "Of course I'll come," I promised. "Just tell me when." That summer unfolded differently than I'd planned. I spent the first month in Chicago at the Tribune, working on a major investigative piece about education funding inequities across Illinois. Then I moved to Lakeside for 6 weeks, living with Grandma Evie while continuing my work remotely. Our time together took on a special quality: unhurried conversations over morning coffee, evening walks through her garden, impromptu drives to Lake Michigan, where we'd sit on the beach and talk about everything from politics to philosophy to the latest novels we'd both read. The medical tests proved inconclusive. Nothing urgent enough to require immediate intervention, but nothing definitive enough to dismiss concerns entirely. Grandma Evie approached the uncertainty with characteristic pragmatism. "Life is always uncertain," she told me as we sat on her porch swing one evening. "We just become more aware of it at certain junctures." I visited my parents regularly during this time as well. They'd sold the family home and downsized to a townhouse closer to the center of Lakeside, a practical decision now that both Mark and I had moved out. The smaller space suited them. They seemed more relaxed, more focused on each other rather than on orchestrating family dynamics. Mark had been promoted to production manager at his company and had moved to Milwaukee for better opportunities. He'd found his niche in the technical and logistical aspects of media production, not the creative role he'd once envisioned, but one that suited his sociable nature and newly developed work ethic. Who would have thought Mark would end up being the practical one? Mom mused during one of my visits. And you, the adventurous journalist traveling the world? It was an observation that revealed how much her perception had shifted. She could now see us as we actually were, not as the roles she'd unconsciously assigned us years ago. Senior year arrived with the bittersweet awareness that my time at Northwestern was drawing to a close. I threw myself into my honors thesis, an examination of declining local journalism in rural America and its impact on civic engagement, while also applying for fellowships, jobs, and graduate programs. Grandma Evie's health remained stable, neither improving nor worsening. She continued her regular routines, refusing to let medical uncertainty dictate her choices. We spoke every Sunday without fail, and I visited whenever I could manage a weekend away from campus. It was during one of these visits, a crisp October weekend with leaves turning gold and crimson, that she presented me with another envelope. "This isn't for now," she said, echoing her words from years earlier. "This is for after graduation, when you're deciding on next steps." I took the envelope, recognizing the pattern. Grandma Evie's careful calibration of when I needed certain truths, certain options, certain perspectives. "No peeking," she warned with a smile. "Some gifts are meant for specific moments." I tucked the envelope into my bag, curious but willing to wait for the right time. Grandma Evie's sense of timing had proven impeccable so far. As graduation approached, my path forward clarified. I'd been offered a prestigious fellowship at the Columbia School of Journalism, a one-year program that would allow me to deepen my investigative reporting skills while working on a major project about political polarization in America. It was exactly what I wanted for the next stage of my journey. The week before graduation, my parents hosted a dinner to celebrate, not just me, but Mark as well, who had recently completed his associate's degree in media technology while working full-time. It was the first time in years that all of us, including Grandma Evie, had gathered at the same table. "A toast," Dad said, raising his glass, "to both our children who have found their own paths and are walking them with integrity and purpose." "And to second chances," Mom added. "At seeing each other clearly." Mark caught my eye across the table and gave me a small, genuine smile. The rivalry that had defined our childhood had dissolved into something more like mutual respect. Not close friendship, perhaps, but a recognition of each other's strengths and journeys. Grandma Evie raised her glass as well. "To legacies," she said, looking directly at me. "Those we inherit, those we create, and those we pass on." Graduation day dawned clear and bright. As I prepared to join my classmates for the ceremony, I found myself thinking about that scared, determined girl who had arrived at Northwestern 4 years earlier, sustained by Grandma Evie's secret fund and her own fierce drive to prove herself, worthy of the opportunity. That girl was gone, replaced by a young woman who had not only thrived academically but had discovered her voice, her purpose, her place in the world. Northwestern hadn't just given me an education, it had given me perspective, the ability to see my family dynamics clearly without being defined by them, to appreciate my parents' belated recognition without needing it for validation, to view Mark's journey with compassion rather than resentment. My family sat together in the audience: Mom, Dad, Mark, and Grandma Evie, who had insisted on coming despite recent fatigue that had her using a cane for the first time. When my name was called and I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I heard their cheers rising above the general applause. Afterward, amid the chaos of thousands of graduates and their families, I found them waiting at our designated meeting spot. There were hugs, tears, photographs, all the traditional markers of the milestone. "We are so proud of you," Mom said, her eyes brimming with genuine emotion. "So incredibly proud." "You've accomplished more than we ever imagined," Dad added. "Though maybe we should have imagined it, given who you've always been." Mark gave me an awkward but sincere hug. "Way to set the bar impossibly high for the rest of us," he joked, but his smile was warm. Grandma Evie embraced me last, holding me tight despite her increasing frailty. "You did exactly what I knew you would," she whispered. "You became exactly who you were meant to be." That evening, alone in my apartment after the family had departed for their hotel, I remembered the envelope Grandma Evie had given me months earlier, the one meant for after graduation. I retrieved it from my desk drawer and carefully broke the seal. Inside was a key and a brief note. "For the apartment in Chicago, when you're ready. A home base for whatever comes next. All my love, Grandma Evie." I stared at the key, turning it over in my hands. An apartment in Chicago, a place of my own in the city where I'd be continuing my education, where the Tribune was based, where Grandma Evie had once begun her own career all those years ago. It was a practical gift, certainly. But like everything, from Grandma Evie, it was also symbolic, a vote of confidence in my future, a bridge between her path and mine, a foundation from which I could build whatever came next. The following week, Grandma Evie took me to see the apartment, a sunlit one-bedroom on the north side of Chicago, walking distance from the lake, in a well-maintained vintage building. It was modest but charming, with built-in bookshelves and large windows. It had been an investment property of hers for years, she explained, rented to a succession of responsible tenants until now. "The deed is in your name," she told me as we stood in what would soon be my living room. "Regardless of what happens with my health, this place is yours." "Thank you doesn't seem adequate," I said. "Then don't thank me," she replied. "Just use it well. Fill it with books and ideas and friends who challenge you. Write important things at that desk by the window. Make it a place where truth matters." In August, I moved into the apartment and began my fellowship at Columbia. The work was demanding but deeply satisfying, a natural extension of everything I'd been building toward at Northwestern. My investigative project gained attention from national publications, leading to freelance opportunities alongside my academic work. Grandma Evie's health declined gradually that fall. Nothing dramatic, just a slow diminishment of energy, an increasing need for rest. She moved into an assisted living facility in Lakeside, a decision she made practically and without sentimentality. My mind is still sharp as a tack, she told me during one of our weekly calls. But this old body is finally showing its age. Better to adjust while I can still make my own choices. I visited every other weekend, making the drive from Chicago to spend Saturdays with her. We still had our deep conversations, our shared books, our political debates. Her physical presence might have diminished, but her essential self, her wisdom, her insight, her quiet strength, remained unchanged. In December, just before Christmas, she suffered a mild stroke. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about her recovery, but the event shifted something fundamental. There was a new fragility to her, a recognition of limits that hadn't been there before. I took a leave from my fellowship to spend the holiday with her. My parents and Mark joined us at the facility for Christmas dinner. The 5 of us gathered around a small table in the private dining room. "I have something to tell all of you," Grandma Evie said as we finished our meal. "Something I should have shared long ago." She told them then what she'd already revealed to me about her journalism career, her investments, the true source of her financial security. My mother listened with wide eyes, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked when Grandma Evie finished. "All those years? I thought you were just getting by on Grandpa's pension and your librarian salary." "Would it have changed anything if you'd known?" Grandma Evie asked, echoing the question she'd once posed to me. "Mom considered this. Maybe. I might have made different choices, been more ambitious myself. Or maybe not," Grandma Evie said gently. "We each have to find our own way, Diane. I didn't want my story to overshadow yours." There was more discussion, more questions, more revelations. By the end of the evening, I could see a new understanding dawning in my mother's eyes. Not just about Grandma Evie, but about herself, about the patterns that had shaped our family across generations. Grandma Evie recovered from the stroke, but never quite regained her former energy. When I completed my fellowship the following summer and accepted a position as an investigative reporter at the Tribune, she was the first person I called with the news. "The circle closes," she said, satisfaction evident in her voice, "though yours is just beginning." 3 years later, I published my first book, an expansion of my fellowship project that examined the growing divide in how Americans access and process information. It received critical acclaim and established me as a voice in discussions about media literacy and democracy. At the book launch in Chicago, my family sat in the front row, Mom and Dad, now fully retired and traveling extensively. Mark, who had started his own production company specializing in corporate training videos. And Grandma Evie, now in a wheelchair, but still sharp-witted and engaged at 87. "I want to acknowledge someone special," I said during my remarks. "My grandmother, Evelyn Barrett, who was not only my first and most important supporter, but was also a groundbreaking journalist herself, working at this very newspaper in the 1950s when few women held such roles." There was a murmur of surprise in the audience, and I saw several of my Tribune colleagues exchange glances of sudden recognition. The Evelyn Barrett internship that has launched so many careers, including mine, bears her name not just as a benefactor, but as a pioneer who understood firsthand the challenges and opportunities of this profession. I looked directly at her. Everything I am as a journalist, I owe to her example and her belief in me. Grandma Evie's eyes shone with tears as the audience applauded. It was the first public acknowledgement of her professional legacy, the unveiling of a truth that had remained private for decades. Afterward, as guests mingled and purchased books, she motioned me to her side. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "My name doesn't need to be known." "Maybe not," I agreed, kneeling beside her wheelchair. "But your story deserves to be told, just as you've always made sure mine would be." She took my hand, her grip still surprisingly strong. "The most important gift we can give each other isn't money or opportunities or even love," she said. "It's recognition, truly seeing someone for who they are and who they might become. You saw me when no one else did. I said softly. And now you see others, she replied. That's how legacies work, Emma. Not through bank accounts or property deeds, but through the passing of perspective from one generation to the next. I think often about that conversation as I build my career, as I mentor young journalists, as I uncover stories that need telling. I think about the brother who once took what should have been mine, and how that seeming injustice set me on a path to finding what was truly mine. I think about parents who learned, imperfectly but genuinely, to see beyond their own limitations. And most of all, I think about the grandmother who planned all along, not just for my education or my housing, but for my understanding of myself and my place in a longer story. Some people are born into lives where they're constantly reminded of their worth. Others have to discover it through harder paths, through absences that force strength, through struggles that build resilience. But sometimes, if we're very fortunate, there's someone who sees us clearly from the beginning. Someone who knows exactly what we need and when we need it. Someone who plans not just for our success, but for our understanding of how we achieved it. In the end, perhaps the greatest inheritance isn't what's given to us, but what's awakened within us. The capacity to see clearly, to choose wisely, and to continue stories that began long before we entered the world and will continue long after we leave it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.